Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming tonight. My name is Katie Koch. I'm with Writer's Block Bookstore here in Winter Park. I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of the bookstore as well as the Winter Park Library. We are honored to have you all here tonight. Just a quick little thank you from both of us. I know it means a lot to spend your Thursday night here with us. And thank you to everyone who's joining online for spending your Thursday evening with us as well. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you tonight. We're going to have Lisa Gardner in conversation with David Baldacci. Thank you.
Okay, are we live now? Yes. All
Can you hear us? Good. Okay.
right, I'm going to make you guys work for 1 second to make my publicist happy. Hold up your books and wave them around and do whatever makes you happy. Wait, I got to actually get back to get all of you in the frame. Holy moly. Good job, everyone. All right, have fun with it. Yay. Look at how great you are, the best looking audience to date. All right, good job. You've done your work. Okay, we can go.
This is the first stop at the book tour, by the way, just so you know. Well, thank you all for coming. I'm David Baldacci. I'm here to talk with my good friend Lisa about her brand new book, which I devoured in just a few nights. Um, First of all, um, tell us how you wrote the book. I know we all have a process, and we all, but this seemed different. This is the first book for you in a couple of years. You went to a very cool place. You traveled the world and really built up a lot now that you can write about later on. But sort of tell me, deconstruct for this, how you went about putting this all together,
So, the making of a novel.
the making of a
How
novel.
much time do we have to? So, yes, what David says is true. After writing 30 years, I decided to take a 1 year sabbatical. And one of my passions is travel. So, I did what I call the Lasagna World Tour. I started in the Antarctic and I ended in the Arctic. I mean, everyone goes this way. That's a little boring if you think about it. So, my middle stop ended up being with the Nature Conservancy, an isolated island called the Palmyra Atoll that's really on the equator. You go to Hawaii and then it's a 3 hour charter flight outside of that, or it's 2 weeks by boat. And I was going there to learn about the ecological reclamation of coral, which, in case you want to know, they were doing a really good job of it. But you land in this very isolated island. You're off the grid. I mean, there's no electricity, there's no plumbing, there's no fresh water there. It's a cistern. I learned for the first time, like these research centers are staffed by contract employees. So it's 12 people, but they really are strangers to each other. So, like the engineer starts out in McMurdo for 9 months, then does Palmyra for a few months so he can get some sun, and then finishes in Alaska. And this is a whole lifestyle. I mean, these are people actually just like Frankie. They don't have permanent addresses and they don't want one. But you get there and, they start asking, saying things like, it'd be better if you didn't have your appendix. And you're like, uh-oh. If you're allergic to bees, you're not even allowed to go because there's wasps on the island. They manage what you drink, they manage what you eat. You have to be ready to muster at a moment's notice. You are each other's backup, and you start to realize what it really means to live such an isolated place where, there's no hope of rescue, no chance of escape. But I technically was on sabbatical and having a good time. Like, I had totally got to set this for people. Yes. So that became the basis for Still See You Everywhere, where Frankie ends up in this very, very remote location trying to find a missing Hawaiian girl that might have been kidnapped 15 years ago at the behest of a serial killer. Because why not? That was just good, clean fun, actually.
Everything was the beautiful butcher, or
Yeah.
yeah. Um, so when you went there for another reason to see what they were doing. Now, did you start taking notes and getting ideas for this book while you were out there, or was that after you came back?
When I travel anyway, I do a scrapbook and I try to make sure I documented more things. Again, we were talking a little bit earlier. One of the things with location is I like to use the five senses. I think it's something that makes it come alive. And novelists, well, I'm going to ask you this question too. Every now and then there is a book where you could argue the location really is a character. It is that important. The feel of what in the book becomes Pomakai is integral everything that's happening. And so, yes, I tried to document as much as I could. Now, have you had a book, do you think? Well, the Atlee Pines a little because the Grand Canyon really does matter.
Yeah, it does. We took a trip out to the Grand Canyon one year and we had a ride out there with a guy who his whole life was wrapped up around the Grand Canyon. And I was in the front seat and my wife was in the back and a couple of our friends. And the guy was fascinating. Yeah, he was a blowhard and he just talked nonstop. But I kept asking him questions until the point where my wife was kicking the back of the chair and whispering to me to shut the you know, because she was trying to take a nap. And so when I got back, it was just for me, it was just the enormity of the canyon and the mystery that no human being on Earth has ever seen all of it, which was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And then to set something there, it was kind of like a little bit being on the atoll. You're in the middle of the Grand Canyon. It's like Lord of the Flies. There's no law really if you're down there, and there's nobody that's going to come in to rescue you. You have to get out on your own, as Frankie and her group had to do.
Because I like the places where you have to use your own ingenuity,
Yeah.
to kind of get in and out.
Yeah, yes. I was really fascinated by it. So Frankie is an unlikely heroine.
Yeah.
And so let me ask you, where did she come from? I heard you were talking
Yeah.
with a friend about that or a reader about that earlier, but I'd like to sort of know where in your mind, I know she was based on a real person, but go a little bit deeper on that.
Yeah, so I was actually joking. So one of the things I do to procrastinate, which you must never do based on how many novels you produce in a year, I'm still bitter about that. I like to surf all the interesting articles on the internet, anything labeled strange news or anything that's an interesting personality piece. Because much like you interviewing this guy in the Grand Canyon as novelists, we're always looking for interesting people, interesting jobs, that kind of stuff. And I came across an article on a real world person, Lisa Yellowbird Chase, who on her tribal lands got frustrated by the number of women that were going missing and they weren't even opening up investigations. So she started doing it herself and, in fact, sadly recovered some bodies of women that they'd listed as runaways. And that's not what had happened at all. And it got me thinking we have this trend overall going on where you're seeing a lot more almost amateur sleuths because of the internet and the access for information. We have like the Sherlock clubs, people, a lot of them retired law enforcement or whatnot, but starting to take on some of the big classic murder cases and things like that. And, David and I were talking a little in the back. As a thriller author right now, it gets a little more challenging all the time because there's so many advancements in forensics and technology and cameras everywhere. Like I'm setting books in Boston, and it's like, how can you even, spit out chewing gum and not get caught on a camera in Boston? And what I loved was the nature of these investigations, as if policing could have solved it, it would have. If forensics had held the answer, it would have. You're back to the days of just old fashioned gumshoe detective work, of interviewing people, of asking the right questions and listening to the answers. And I found that very refreshing.
Yeah, I think we were also talking in the back about how the film and television sort of gives a skewed version of what law enforcement and police investigation is like. I mean, we've both been into lots of places that are real where these people work. They look nothing like, there are no cool offices,
Yeah. This
people don't,
library we established is way nicer than any law enforcement building we've been in.
yeah, way nicer, DNA does not come back in 3 hours. And they don't solve every case. So we were also talking about a friend of ours, Sue Grafton, who wrote Kinsey Millhone series, A is for Alibi, B is for Burglar. And what I love about Sue is she was stuck in the 1980s. She never had to worry about, as we have to worry about, a reader writing and go, why didn't they just Google it on their phone, idiot? So sometimes I wish some of my books were like captured in the 1980s when I don't have to worry about that. But
Well, it's fun. I've been around so long when they re-released the old novels. Some of them took place before you had to have ID to fly. And, readers start sending you in notes. And it's like,
Yes.
okay, you got to look at the copyright because they don't let us go back. I mean,
No.
So we don't get to change that kind of
Right.
thing.
Good smoke on airplanes. Yes, you're
Yeah.
absolutely good smoke on airplanes. It's
No
crazy,
cell
isn't it?
phones.
Yeah, no cell phones. Well, this Frankie seems like a character we're going to see again. I would imagine it's just a nice setup. I want to say at the book ends, but in the beginning, I was a lawyer for a long time, and I don't want to give anything away because I hate when people do that. but the prison scene, death row scene, was really good. And can you talk about that a little bit when she went to visit?
Well, so much like you, I'm sure I get inspired by things in the headlines. And a couple of years ago, there was a big death row case that was being debated in Texas, where it was a mother, Hispanic, and she was about to be executed after like 7 years, which never happens. Generally, you're on death row for the last person was 50 years before something happens. So just a lot of attention to, again, is this racial bias? Is this socioeconomic? Of course, you're coming someone from a marginalized community. And then it came out there's doubts that she had been found guilty of murdering her child, that the child had even been murdered, that there was reason to believe it actually had been an accidental death. And so following that and seeing how quick that could happen and some of those issues helped me come up with a beautiful butcher who will introduce you to the proper care and feeding of pigs. Um, though in her case, I'd like the record to show she's totally unrepentant. She did it. She was happy she did it. She would do it again. Which, because you have to have some fun with these things too.
Yeah.
She was actually one of my favorite characters. I'm not going to lie.
And you can have a meal with Lisa later if you want. No, she was a great character. And I like that she stuck to her principles, work as they were.
Yeah.
But
Well, you write series with, there's spies, there's FBI. I mean, you decide what you're gonna, like, even what jurisdiction you're gonna fall in.
yeah, it's all what I think captures my fancy in the moment what I'm interested in.
Is it a crime or a character that comes to you first?
Done it both ways.
Okay.
I happen upon a plot, and I created characters to execute that plot, and I come up with a character like Memory Man, Amos Decker, and then I built a world around him that he could do fun things. And I can't say which one is better or worse. It's all in the moment of what you're feeling at that point in time. And don't ever think that, there's no template or formula for doing any of this. You're creating something that didn't exist before you thought of it. If you think about that, most jobs, people get really good at doing them by doing the same thing over and over again
Yeah.
and getting all the wrinkles and mistakes out of the way. I would hate, for instance, if I were on a plane and the pilot gets in the cockpit and says, for 30 years I've flown this plane the same way. Today, different. I really wouldn't want to be there when that happens.
Yeah.
But as a writer, I think that you can have some ways you do things, but you have to keep reinventing yourself in the way you do things. Otherwise, you're going to write the same book over and over again, and eventually people are going to get tired of reading it, and you're going to be bored writing it. So I always try to fill up my passion tank with any book. I don't want to write 300 pages and then realize I had no interest. When that happens,
Oh.
I always try to fill up my passion tank
head first
with
in
any
every
book.
book.
I don't want to write
Now
300
I
pages
take a
and
little
then
time
realize
about
I had no interest.
playing it
When
out
that
in my head.
happens,
I
always try to
focus
fill
on
up
my
my passion
passion
tank
tank head first
with
in
any
every
book.
book.
I don't want to write
Now
300
I
pages
take a
and
little
then
time
realize I
about
had no interest.
playing it
When
out
that
in my head.
happens,
I
always
Yeah, I think we're two people as well as writers that don't like to be bored.
no.
And part of the inspiration behind Frankie was just I'd done FBI profilers, I'd done Detective DD. I was having a great deal of fun with a vigilante, but it was just again time for change, and when it's fresh to us,
Yes.
it will be fresh to you.
You know, the question earlier was, what's your favorite book? For me, it's the book I'm working on. That's my favorite book, because that's really where everything is, the passion and energy
That's the
is
one I
focused.
hate. For the record, I hate the book I'm working on. I like the books that are already done. We're going to have to agree to disagree on that.
We can. We can. But there's nothing cooler than starting a new series, very first book, very first page, because it's all fresh in there. You have no idea where you're going to go. I don't know the ending of any book before I sit
I
down to
never
write it.
do.
I go
Do you
back and
plot?
forth. What?
Do you plot?
A little bit, a chapter here, a chapter there.
Okay, I
I
like
just
you
let
again.
I
That-
let
that-
I just
that's the right way to do it. Yeah.
I like to let it grow organically. I
Yeah,
mean, how do you outline a book from, and you haven't even met the characters on the page yet?
exactly.
How do you know what they're going to do?
This man knows of what she speaks. And I love it when readers come up and say, I had no idea how that was going to end. Because I'm like, yeah, me neither.
Me neither.
Yeah. Aren't we both so happy it worked out?
Well, there's that urgency too. You don't have urgency in an outline. That's like I can always fix it later. So I always get the analogy of anybody here is not a New England Patriots fan or whatever. It's Tom Brady on the field. Where do you think Tom Brady is the most laser focused? In practice, where nobody's going to lay a hand on the guy, or in a real game where they're going to look and split his head open on every play? He's going to be more attuned to the game. And writing the novel is the game, not the outline. The outline is practice. So when you're writing the novel, your synapses are firing off. You see the entire field, everything that's going to happen. Your brain's going a million miles a minute. You make better decisions because what you decide is going to matter to your characters. That's how I feel.
Yeah, and there's nothing like being 2 weeks before deadline and realizing you still don't have that ending. Sheer terror, I think, has ended a number of novels.
Deadline's a great motivator. They really are. But so where do you see Frankie going next?
Well, what I like about Frankie, again,
Not that I'm saying she survives this book, but just in case she does.
having written books that fell under certain law enforcement jurisdictions, they also had to happen in certain locations. And while I like Boston very much, and it is an excellent place to hide bodies, both true and fictional, frankly. um, Frankie can move all around, and I have found that liberating. Like, it was really fun to stick her in paradise and give her a crab and a wolf spider as roommates. But also on my travels, because we do like to interrogate people as authors, I met a couple who volunteered to help resettle Afghan refugees in Tucson. And the issues there were quite staggering and impressive. And you want to talk about a community that falls through the cracks and has been isolated. And so, yeah, Frankie goes to Tucson. Actually, for the longest time, that was my title for the book. They're like, what are you calling? Like, he goes to Tucson.
I think you still need to write that book with that title. That sounds really good. Well, you've written a number of series too, and I get to the point, 5, 6, 7 books into it where you just feel like I want to try something fresh and do something else and explore more because we only have, a limited number of years to actually do this. So
Yeah.
is that how you feel too? You just get to the point where I want to try something different.
Yeah, I think the key writing a series, I'll be curious your take on this, is the character has to evolve. Which, with Detective Dee Dee Warren, for me, for the longest time, was really a great deal of fun. She was a workaholic detective. So, I had her meet a man. And then, because that wasn't traumatizing enough, she finds herself pregnant. It was really easy to torture her for a while. Then, she went and got happy. And there's only so many times you can almost kill a happy woman. Took some of the fun out of it for me. And then, it's time to kind of play with some new things for a while.
Yeah. No, I feel sort of the same way. I mean, if you're just going through the motions, and I like to load characters up with baggage that I can
Yeah.
then exploit in different future books. They have a lot of issues and problems, as we all do. But once you've gone through that, and if the answer is that you're bringing them back just to bring them back because you have another contract to fulfill or your fans like them, um, that's probably not the best answer because the energy is not going to be there. You're just going through the motions, so it's best to go off and do something else. Not to say you can't come here, visit, make her sad again. She's happy now. That can't last.
One of the things I've liked about Frankie compared to doing law enforcement characters is, again, she's not. So, as bad things happen in books. She got into missing persons because she doesn't like blood. But unfortunately, the answers sometimes lead you to homicidal and scary places. She gets to take that with her into the next book and the next. I mean, these experiences are shaping her as we go along. You cannot expect her to be compartmentalized and be brushing that off. Oh, that was last week's episode. So it's fun to watch really how each plot continues to mold her and change her for then what happens next.
Well, I think it was really cool, particularly on the atoll where she can't pull out a cred pack and a gun and say, "Do what I'm telling you to do."
Yeah.
On the law. She really has to be more clever and
Yeah.
more ingenious about how she goes about it.
My favorite thing about Frankie is her only superpower because I purposefully, we already have Flora Dane, the vigilante, who's kick ass, and we already have Dee Dee Warren, who's just a badass. So Frankie is just an everyday average person. She's not physically imposing. She does not have mad hacker skills. She does not, suddenly know martial arts or anything like that. Her superpower is listening. She is a fabulous listener. She will ask anyone a question and then she actually stops and listens to the answer. And I feel like that's a skill set we've lost. and that perhaps more problems would be solved
Yeah.
applying that skill set.
Well, I think one thing writers do, we listen as well, and we're down here now and all of you are listening to us, but I'd much rather be out there listening to all of you
Yes.
eavesdropping on what you're saying so I can use it in the next book. But listening is a critical piece of being a writer, just in observing. And when I was a little kid, I called myself, you remember the book Harriet the Spy? I was Harry the Spy as a little kid. I just loved to eavesdrop on everybody else's conversation. Them tick. And so I think that is a lost art, but listening is a superpower. And she certainly used it to her full effect in the novel.
So David and I are both members of the International Thriller Writers, and there's a major conference each year in New York, which is, all the big authors come in and are talking craft, business, all sorts of aspects of writing. And it's funny because, we go each year, or I go each year, and people like, you're here to speak. I'm like, oh God, no, I'm here to learn. I mean, you get these, Bob Stein up talking about, how Goosebumps was developed. Jack Carr last year was just fabulous. You learn something every time. I don't think you ever tire of learning things.
No, I think the other attribute writers have is they're ever curious about what makes the world work or doesn't work.
It makes people work.
Yeah. We try to take those stories and try to make a little bit of sense out of them, either one way or the other. And plot is great, and we all enjoy the plots, but the only opportunity we have to connect you with the novel on a human level is through the characters, to see them rise or fall, because we all do that in our lives. We rise, we fall, we get back up again. And that's really the visceral human connection in any story.
I had a fun conversation last night with Geneva Rose, who's an amazing author. You guys should all be reading you if you're not. And she has Home is Where the Bodies Are is about to come out. It's an excellent book. She was talking about most of her books start with this question of what if. I'm like, because I would think most of my ideas start with why.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons Frankie has grown on me, or I like her so much, is I still don't know why she's doing what she's doing. It really is not sane. But maybe that's the human condition. How often do we go through any day and do something that even if we know we shouldn't, we do it anyway? Or even if we're not sure why we're doing it, we just have to do it.
Well, I mean, she performed a worthy service in the novel for sure. She helped a lot of people along the way, but she was very human throughout, and I felt like she had all the reactions that people would have in that situation, which made it really authentic for me. I don't like books where somebody does something so ridiculous that you sort of lose faith in the credibility of both the character and the writer at the same time, and that is not the case with Frankie in this novel. Okay. So what's next for you?
Cool. So I'm working on the next Frankie. And now that I'm back from sabbatical, I'm trying to travel less, but possibly I'm hiking in Portugal and then I'm hiking in Patagonia. But I swear I'm working on the next book, David. And if my editor calls, you tell them I am working on my next book. What are you working on right now?
I'm finishing up the book for the fall. It's a
Which series or standalone?
series. It's a 620 Man. It's the third book in that series. It's set. I was out again. I like to travel too, and I was out in Seattle last fall, and it's set in Seattle, which is kind of an interesting place too. A great place to dump bodies too. There are more serial killers in the Pacific Northwest than anywhere else in this country. So,
I grew up with Bundy. I think sometimes often my interest in the subject.
Yeah.
And one of the fun things with The Beautiful Butcher is we don't have tons of female serial killers, and there's reasons for that. Men have a tendency to externalize rage, women have a tendency to internalize it. But it's also been kind of fascinating as gender roles have changed when you talk to police officers and people in law enforcement. They're seeing some equality come about in that world as well.
It's about time.
The Beautiful Butcher will agree with you.
Are we set for Q&A time-wise, or? Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, great. Any questions from the audience? Just so you know, if you don't ask questions, we will begin asking questions of each of you. We'll start over here.
How long does it normally take you to write a book?
Yes, in the mind.
How long does it normally take you to write a book?
Well, I would like to say I'm a traditional author, unlike some overachiever over here. So it takes me generally a year. 3 months of that's roughly the research. 6 months of that is writing what, people refer to as, the vomit draft. You have to just give your self permission to write very badly. And then I'm a huge believer in rewriting. Like I often feel I'm not a great writer, but I'm a really good rewriter. So that's the last stage it goes through.
There's a library in Maryland that has first editions of famous books, uh, like The Great Gatsby, but it also has first drafts of those manuscripts as well. So you can see what started, as Lisa was talking about, starting from a pile of pages here to a classic novel, and all the sweat equity goes into making this into that, and it is a lot. And if you go to the Library of Congress, they have digitized all our founding documents, Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and you can go in and click on it, and it will show you all the marginalia comments that the founding fathers wrote on those documents to change it, like Jefferson's draft of the Declaration. You'll have one where he had 3 words. Jefferson could be very verbose. He was a great writer. And the 3 words were struck out by the hand of another founder, and he wrote in the word inalienable, which is probably the most famous word in the Declaration. And the person who wrote that was Benjamin Franklin. So sometimes it does take a village.
Yeah.
Do you save all of your first drafts and all of that, or do you pitch it?
No, I do not save anything. But one of the things I love about the vomit draft is no one ever has to know. It's between you, your computer, and frankly, my 3 dogs.
So my question is, growing up, did you always want to be a writer? And if not, how did you come to be?
Growing up, I was always writing, but I didn't actually really know you could be a writer. I grew up in Oregon. I spent a lot of time in the Tillamook County Library with my grandmother. My family, interesting enough, is all mathematicians and engineers. So both my parents are accountants. So definitely we joke that's what you repress enough creativity for enough generations. This is what you get. So I was always writing, but I was always just thinking it was a hobby. And I actually wrote my first book at 17. I sold it in college at 20, for enough money to buy a computer, which didn't exactly sell the industry on me. But I just couldn't quit. Maybe this is what Frankie and I have in common. Even if it didn't make sense, I kept producing novels and selling them for little bits of money. And then I entered the real world and became a business consultant and realized the real world kind of sucks. And bosses, it turned out I was not a fan of having a boss at all. And so I decided, yes, I wanted to be a full time novelist. And I joined my first writing organization, and it was actually fellow authors. We were a very collegial group, I have to say, who helped me get my first agent. And she was like, all right, this is how this is done. First thing, write a thriller and kill a lot more people. I thought it was great advice. As career advice, I like, and as a lawyer, does anyone ever give you that as advice?
We kill more people. Yeah. I certainly gave that advice to a lot of people.
How'd you get into this as a reformed lawyer?
Yeah, I was writing short stories when I was a kid. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, and I was the sort of kid that argued with everybody about everything, including principals, school officials, certain law enforcement people, to get myself out of trouble. And they started calling me the Austin Avenue lawyer at age 6. I grew up to become a trial lawyer, where I got to talk a lot in front of people and enjoyed that very much. But when I was in law school, I went to University of Virginia Law School. And when my classmates were logically trying out for law review and moot court, I was back in my apartment writing short stories and trying to sell them to Playboy magazine. We wrote a lot of tremendous short
Yeah,
fiction
yeah.
back then. Toni Morrison and a stream of great writers were published in Playboy. I never got there, just to let you know. You can't read my stuff in Playboy, but I've always been a storyteller, always wanted to do that. I couldn't make a living doing it, so I practiced law for 10 years, but kept wrote everything, from short stories to screenplays, novellas, and eventually novels. So, um, I mean, I didn't know if I was ever going to make it. It was a long time, but I couldn't not write. It would be like, telling me to stop breathing. So that wasn't an option.
Maybe this is why we're always writing about stubborn, determined people, because as novelists, you have to be.
Yeah. It's a gauntlet you have to run for sure. And I always think that people who are meant to be writers will be writers because it hurts when you get rejected. It really does. But if you love writing and you can't live without it, it's like body armor. So the rejection hits you, but it's not a mortal wound and it wears off and you keep going. If you don't really love it, I ask people, why do you want to be a writer? Well, I want to sell the film rights over the weekend and retire from my job. That sucks in the real world because I've got a boss that I hate. That's not going to keep you through all the bad times. You don't have the body armor. That first rejection is going to hit you. You're dead.
So I've always been curious from TV writers and authors, since you know what you're talking about in your books, do you ever feel like you could be an investigator based off your research? Like, could you solve a crime? Because I would never guess.
I do not think I could solve a crime. I think if I wasn't a novelist, actually, criminology is really what would interest me, the psychology behind it all. But I don't know, I don't have the observation skills, honestly. I mean, the good detectives, the things they see and the things they remember. I mean, it was a silly little crime when I was in college, and the police came and they like, okay, what did he look like? And I'm like, um, I think it was a guy. So based on that alone, I would make a terrible investigator.
Oh, and eyewitness testimony is the worst. I mean, it's such a misnomer. Eyewitness testimony. I was there. I saw it happen. I have no idea what happened. I couldn't, but more people, actually, most people on death row today are there because of eyewitness testimony. Usually just the one person. And I can tell you for a fact as a lawyer that it is very much socioeconomic. Justice in America is bought and paid for. There are no millionaires on death row. I can guarantee you that. There are lots of people who had terrible lawyers, public defenders, didn't have the time, the wherewithal, the energy, the ambition, or the knowledge to defend them properly. And until the 1960s, you weren't even entitled to a lawyer. So if you were a marginalized person in 1963 and you were charged with a crime, you had the option of pleading guilty or standing in the court and defending yourself if you couldn't afford a lawyer. Not that long ago, actually. So it's interesting. Well, I tell you, criminals are not nearly as smart as they make them
Yeah.
out to be on television. They're just not. A lot of the motivation is, a sad motivation, but I think you make a good detective. I really
It's
do.
fun when I go to interview law enforcement. I'm like, okay, I'm going to bring you this really incredible, over the top crime that no criminal would actually do. And you're going to help me solve it. And it makes them really happy because the law enforcement, they really don't get to go after Hannibal Lecter.
No.
So at least fictionally, they can stretch their brain a little because they're like, normally, you walk in the scene and it's like, yeah, it's the guy standing over the dead body still holding the knife. Yeah, but I'm pretty sure he did it.
I wrote a book one time that dealt with the intelligence field in the US. And I had a friend of mine in that field. And I said, I've got some pages that I want you to read. I think I've pushed the envelope too much. I think I've gone too far. He goes, I don't have to read it. I said, no, it's just a few pages. I want to make sure because I think I've just gone over the top. I don't think this is plausible. He said, I don't have to read it. I said, why don't you have to read it? He said, because if you can imagine it, we've already done it.
Mm.
Now, if that doesn't scare the shit out of you, something wrong with you because it's
Hello, Miss Gardner. When you are hiking in Portugal, are you going to go on the Camino de Santiago de Compostela?
No, but I really want to, and that's a few, but I want more time to do that. This will be yes, I would love to do that pilgrimage sometime. My editor in England did it, and I've been incredibly jealous ever since.
Thank you.
That's a good question.
Yeah, the world's huge. I spent a year traveling it, and my daughter gave me a giant, a really beautiful world map where you could scratch off the countries you go to. So afterwards, I'm scratching away with my quarter. I'm thinking, I've been everywhere. Lasagna World Tour. It's like I did like 1/20th. I mean, yeah, you're lucky I came to drink. And the penguins were really cute, and I miss them.
Hi. You talked about Dee Dee and how you developed her over time. She didn't want a husband, then she got a husband and she has a kid and all these things. Well, Frankie's very similar in a sense that she makes a point that she's not going to attach. Do you think that will grow over time where she might attach as well?
It's interesting because I don't plan things in advance. One of the things that think makes Frankie is this really is who she is. She's not meant to settle down. Lead Child with Jack Reacher. I think they even used it in the TV show. Reacher has this line where, back in the caveman days, there were people who sat around the fire, and then there are the ones that had to get up and wander. And Reacher's like, I'm one of the wanderers. Well, for the record, there are a lot of women in those covered wagons too. There are a lot of women who are leading some of these expeditions. I think Frankie's a wanderer. I don't see her settling down. I think really the issue is for her to accept that because I think it's harder if you're a female leading this lifestyle when everyone's telling you, no, no, no. Happiness looks like real life is supposed to be. What's wrong with you? You are not checking these boxes. And I think that gets to be more pressure on. She still is who she is. Will we see Dee Dee come back? It's actually been the number one question of the tour. I know. Yes. But I won't tell you when. So good luck.
Do you have a favorite character in all of your books?
Do I have a favorite character in all of my books? I actually don't. In many ways, I'm actually curious about this question for you as well. My characters, in some ways, to me, almost represent moods. Like when I'm really angry, the Flora Dane books are awesome. Like, yes, let me Google how to kill someone with a straw. That is the mood I'm in today. Frankie's the more like I think I could be reasonable and talk to others. And then Dee Dee's like, I just want to argue all day long. It's like she's the argumentative one. So they each have their place in my heart. I was saying for characters I read, I'm madly, madly in love with Will Trent. All should be too. Now, what about all your characters? Because you have a much bigger cast to choose from than I do.
Yeah, I don't know. It's somewhat tied to mood. They're all very different characters.
I'm Team Atlee Pine, just you know.
Yeah, I know. Adley was. I People ask where the name came from. It's a very southern name. It can be both boy and girl. My parents used to live outside of Richmond. We would go down to visit them from the DC area off of 95, and if you turn to the left, you went to Atlee, Virginia. If you turn to the right, you went to my parents. I would see that sign all the time, and I always wanted to use that name at some point in one of my novels. So she was the first. I've written a lot of female characters in my novels. She was the first one to lead a novel series by herself, which was a challenge for me. I mean, it's hard as a man to write about women. I was lucky that I grew up with formidable female in my life. My my mom and dad's families were huge. My mom was the youngest of 10, grew up in a mountain in Southwest Virginia. My dad was a middle age of 9, Italian American family, first generation Italian American. So I had, I don't know, 7 million aunts, you know, and they would all come over for Sunday dinner and all that. And my mom was a force of nature. So I grew up with that. And I can't say that I can't see the world through the eyes of a female. Obviously, I can't. I'm fascinated by the questions that you're being asked. And this helps me as a writer actually to sort of understand this symbiotic relationship going back and forth. I do the best that I can with the characters that I create, whatever gender, where they come from. It's um, my my philosophy is that a writer can write about anything.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't be afraid to challenge themselves and go to places that people don't think they should be. Sometimes that's the reason why they should be there. So I don't know. I don't have a favorite character, but they're my favorite when I'm writing about them. And then I move on to other things, and then I get excited about that.
Yeah, we kind of joke sometimes right now in the thriller world because there's a lot of angst. If you're this person, can you write about that person? And you shouldn't write, and you shouldn't do this, and you shouldn't do that. And I'm like, yeah, but none of them ever question us being the serial killer. That point of view we can do all day long and like, oh no, that's fine. Does that mean they don't think we use our imagination for that?
Don't come and look in my basement. Well, I have a book coming out next month. It's set in 1968, and of all the books that I've written, this is the first time I was ever assigned a sensitivity reader who had to go through the manuscript. It's a lot based on racial tension and where I grew up in the South. And to have that back and forth with that person, to have a sensitivity read of the words that I used and the characters I represented and the dialogue on a very specific level, depending on who the character was and everything else. And that was an eye opener for me as well. But again, you can't be, some of the greatest novels have been written by people who are writing about other people, from walks of life where they never trod that ground. But they observed it and have something to say about it. And I think that's what makes a book like that important and worthwhile.
Kind of just pertains to this whole conversation. I was wondering if either of you have read Yellowface.
I have it to read, but I haven't gotten to read it yet. I'm dying to read it. Have you read it?
I read Babel. her book before that. Yeah,
It just has a lot to do with this subject of
it does.
who should write what and
Well, I'm dying to see the movie American Fiction.
So
Yeah.
it's great.
Yeah.
I loved it.
I noticed it's in the hotel, and I'm kind of like, if I stay up awake late enough tonight.
My daughter gave me the cliff notes on Yellowface, so I'm very
It's really-
interested in reading
it's
it too.
good. It's really good. Yeah. Everyone happy? Oh, nope, one more.
Hello. I was wondering what is the most challenging part of the writing process for you?
Writing. Okay.
Is it getting the book started or rewriting?
Yeah. So actually, for me, because I don't plot a lot, it seems to take me forever to get the first 100 pages. I kind of akin it to you're trying to build the foundation of the house. And inevitably, it's like I do something like, no, that's not going to work there, or it's too small. There's not enough opportunities to move around. So it can take me like 3 months to write the first 100 pages of the book. And each and every time I'm discouraged and like, really, 30 years later, really, this is what this. But the ending of the book can be 3 weeks, sometimes 5 days, because now you're just putting the roof on and you're just seeing everything come together. And that's the fun time. I eat way less chocolate than beginning. A lot of chocolate goes into the making of those first 100 pages. You?
Yeah, so this book I'm working on now for the fall, I wrote 100 pages pretty quickly. Wasn't that jazzed. I sent it up to my editor, and he said, "This is really good." And then I just threw them all away because it just wasn't there.
Yeah.
And so when I sent him the next batch, he was like, "This is even better. What happened to the other pages?" And but it's sometimes you hit it, and sometimes you don't hit it. And that's the unpredictability. When you're building anything else, particularly if it comes to directions, you know you're going to get there at the end because it's telling you where to go step by step. It's just not the writing world, and it's just so subjective to yourself. And sometimes if it's not working, better to just toss it than to try to make something because at the end it's not going to be any good.
I don't
You have to be brutal.
Yeah, I don't think the writing ever gets any easier. That was something I thought was kind of an assumption I had starting out. But I think what does happen after writing as many books as we have is that instinct of this does work and that nagging one, uh-oh, it really doesn't work. Even if your editor's kind to be kind, it's not right. And you have to follow that instinct. That's how the good novels are written.
Yeah, you really do. I mean, if it's crap in, it's going to be crap out, and you have to be honest enough with yourself to realize that. But writing gets harder the more you do it. I think because we both realized how good it could be if we just put a little more effort into it, and have we search for the right word, the right character, a better plot twist, because we know at the end of the day how much better it could be. And I thought early on in my career, I was just trying to get through stuff. I don't think I was really focusing on that, but as you get on in years and you get on in books, you know how good it can be.
Yeah, and there's great new voices coming out all the time. Like I think one of the most exciting things in our industry right now is S.A. Cosby.
Yeah.
Like, love, love, love his books. And as we both continue to read, we read each other, we read
Yeah.
other authors, pushes you. And I mean, there's oftentimes I'm insanely, madly jealous of like, if only I had done that for my first novel. It's good. You want to be pushed. You want to get better.
Yeah. When you see other writers upping their game, you got to up your game too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Fantastic questions.
Well,
Let's give
Thank
a round
you.
of applause. I wanted to take a photo real quick if you guys don't mind.
I'm
I'm
gonna
sure.
take off my headphones.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I'm actually going to have Lisa and David stand right here and hold their book. And I'm going to snap a few. You want me to take one on your phone? Okay. Yay. Perfect. I'm going to set this down.